G'day, it's Mark and welcome back to the channel. And in this episode, we look at the Holden VL Commodore. The VL Commodore was built from February 1986 to August 1988. The VL was available as a 4-door sedan or a 5-door station wagon. The car was assembled at Elizabeth in South Australia, Dandenong in Victoria, Trentham in Wellington, New Zealand, and in Indonesia. And the brief for the designers from the product planning team was to make the Commodore look wider, longer and larger, because the car was still built on the smaller platform and was competing against the Falcon, but now also up against the Mitsubishi Magna. At the front, the car featured new headlights for a wider look, an extended nose cone, also to accentuate the length. The lower bumper also featured a number of horizontal lines to accentuate the width of the car, because the car was competing against the larger Falcon and now the Mitsubishi Magna. While at the rear, in addition to the additional window, which had been released in the VK series, there was a ducktail type spoiler built into the rear boot lid area or trunk area of the car. And so overall, the car certainly looked longer and larger than previous Commodores, although it was still at a size disadvantage compared to the Falcon and even in some cases the Magna. Of particular interest was the differentiation between the Commodore Executive and Bellina versus the Calais models. The Calais had electric eyelids with a unique grille, which was quite interesting. It was an egg crate grille, but it was actually made out of clear, translucent plastic. Very unusual. I'm not sure of any other car designs that featured a clear grille of that type of design. I've seen grilles that mimic headlight extensions, but not a clear grille as such. So I'd be interested to know if anyone else knows of cars that featured that. But the Calais was a very sharp looking car with those little electric eyelids, and it really did create significant differentiation from the other Commodore models. It also featured unique treatment at the rear in terms of a paint out treatment and sort of striping in the across the rear of the vehicle, across the width of the vehicle, and unique alloy wheels, but also lower silver body side protectors and paint out treatments as well. Major changes were also made to the dashboard with all new instrument panels and new switches on either side of the binnacle, which controlled the wipers, the rear window demister, the electric antenna on the Bellina and the Calais, and the headlight switch moved from the right-hand side of the dashboard to the indicator stalk. Heating, ventilation and air conditioning graphics were also changed, and the centre console was all new, which offered more storage, and there was a new transmission shifter and surround. Dimensions of the VL were length 4,766 millimetres or 187.6 inches, width 1,722 millimetres or 67.8 inches, wheelbase 2,668 millimetres or 105 inches, height varied from 1,363 millimetres to 1,368 depending on the model, which was 53.7 inches to 53.9 inches. And curb weight varied from 1,250 kilograms to 1,350, which was 2,760 pounds to 2,980 pounds. Big news was in the engine department. The 6-cylinder engines that Holden had been using were well over 20 years old, and they were a big Achilles heels for the Holden range. When the cars exhibited excellent handling capabilities, the engines often let them down, particularly the 6 cylinders. Available engines in the VL were the 2-litre 4-cylinder, and that was available exclusively for the New Zealand and the Asian or Indonesian market. The really big news was the Nissan-sourced 3-litre straight 6 overhead cam 6, and this was known as the RB30E engine. There's also the availability of a 3-litre RB30ET 6-cylinder, which was a turbocharged engine, and there was the Australian-made 5-litre V8. I might add that the Turbo 6, of course, was also supplied from Nissan. Transmissions, depending on the engines, were a 5-speed manual transmission, a 3-speed automatic, or a 4-speed automatic. The 3-speed automatic was in the V8s. The 4-speed automatic was in the 6s, including the turbo. Holden was really desperate for a new power plant, as I said. They had the old Holden engines, which were 20 to 25 years plus old. So these were dropped in favour of the imported RB30E straight 6 engine. And that was designed and manufactured by Nissan in Japan. And the reason behind this was that all cars manufactured in Australia from the 1st of January 1986 had to run on unleaded 91 fuel. Just as a very quick aside, I remember when I was working at Mitsubishi Australia in the fleet department at head office, there was a delay in the Holden V8 engines. There was an interruption to supply, and there were no V8 Commodores for a period of time because of the changeover to unleaded petrol. And so Chris Licantro, my boss, and I, and it was mainly done by Chris, negotiated with the New South Wales government, and we actually sold the New South Wales Highway Patrol about 120, I think it was, Cordia turbos as police interceptor cars. And Cordia turbos were an extremely popular car at retail. And so the government was able to buy those cars without, sales tax at government contract pricing, was able to use those cars as replacements for the Commodore for a period of time. The police really liked them as well, though they did have a lot of torque steer. And then when the government sold those cars to the public, once they were done with them with, 40,000 Ks, they made substantial profits on every car. So that's just a little aside there. So getting back to the 6-cylinder engines, the tooling was getting pretty worn out for the old black motor, 6-cylinder, plus it couldn't be made to run on unleaded fuel. So Holden did a deal with Nissan to provide the 3-litre 6. Now, the problem here was that Holden was really hemorrhaging a lot of money at this stage and ultimately had to be bailed out by General Motors in America. And the problem was, despite being a great engine, the yen to the Australian dollar started really getting out of control. So these engines started costing Holden a whole lot of money to the point where it was not really profitable, despite the fact that it was a great engine. Despite this, though, let's look at the 3-litre Nissan engine. This engine, the 3-litre, was designed with features such as electronic combustion control system, ram-tuned intake manifolds. There was the availability of a Garrett turbo, which was also fitted inside a water-cooled housing to ensure longevity. The standard 3-litre 6 in the Holden Commodore put out 114 kilowatts. And that was courtesy of its overhead cam design, fuel injection, and its alloy head. The turbocharged engine put out 150 kilowatts, and that was the top performance option, really, available in the Commodore at that stage in terms of standard Commodores. The V8, which put out 122 kilowatts, which is fairly low when you think about it in today's terms, but it did provide good torque, but it was certainly, the turbo was certainly the performance model, I think, in the range versus the V8. As I mentioned, the turbo engine in the VL had was a Garrett turbo with the water-cooled housing to ensure longevity. The engine also had new pistons, which lowered the compression ratio. There's also an updated camshaft that was introduced to reduce overlap. The car had a top speed of around 200 kilometres an hour, 124 miles an hour, and then extended that to 220 kilometres an hour with the turbocharge. So the standard car had performance of 200 kilometres an hour, and the turbo 220 kilometres an hour, which is 137 miles an hour. The turbo models also had larger brakes with Gerlock finned aluminium front calipers. The Australian Police commissioned the turbocharged models as part of their Interceptor BT1 pack options from Holden. And as I mentioned, there was the delay in the provision of the V8s that was released later to comply with unleaded. So police still bought the turbos, but they weren't buying V8s for a period of time, which is where we were able to sell those Mitsubishi Courtiers to fill the gap. The 5-speed manual was also a Nissan gearbox, and the automatic 4-speed was a Jatco, G-A-T-C-O, electronic 4-speed automatic. Power sent to the rear wheels depending on the engine choice. A 25 spline open centre diff in the non-turbo and a 28 spline in the turbo variants with either a 3.45 or a 3.25 final drive ratio, and a limited slip diff was available as an option. So those final drive ratios were actually taller than what was offered in the equivalent Nissan Skylines at the time. So I guess I should mention that, despite Holden doing this deal with Nissan, those engines and transmissions were still available in the Nissan Skyline, which is, what those power plants were actually designed for. But the Nissan ones actually had lower final drive ratios than the equivalent Commodores. New Zealand assembled 6-cylinder VLs. There was a small 2-litre RB20 engine, 6-cylinder, and then there was the option of the 3-litre. The engine was mated to the Japanese Jatco 4-speed automatic per the Australian cars. They also offered the 5-litre V8, and that remained as a carburetor only. There was no fuel injection on the V8, and that had the 3-speed automatic. The 2-litre models that were offered in New Zealand didn't feature emission controls because New Zealand didn't have any emission controls, or certainly nothing comparable to what was mandated in Australia. So obviously they, as a result, had more power. So in their engines, their maximum power was, in the 2-litre, 95 kilowatts or 129 horsepower and 180 newton meters, which is 133 foot-pounds of torque. The 2-litre engine was also used for export to Southeast Asian countries such as Singapore and Thailand. And the VL was also the last Holden to be assembled in Indonesia, offered as the Holden Calais 2000, and then later as the Holden Calais Enterprise. Holden had considered discontinuing the V8 engine rather than adapting it for unleaded petrol, and that was also partly in response to what Ford had done in dropping their V8 back in 1982. Or 83, which was a terrible mistake. But there was such a public outcry, and there was a whole media-driven campaign, which was V8s till 98. And I actually wrote in myself. I've still got the letter from Chuck Chapman saying thanks for writing in and saying you want the V8s to continue. But there was a huge publicity campaign, probably similar to, if you're in America, you might remember when they were looking at discontinuing the rear-wheel drive Mustang, and the Ford Probe, the front-wheel drive Probe, which is a Mazda-based car, was going to be sold as a Mustang replacement. What a disaster that would have been. Look where the Probe is now, and look where the Mustang is. And there was a huge outcry from the public, and all the Mustang enthusiasts, to the point where they then sold the Probe and the Mustang alongside. And as I said, where's the Probe now? So there was a similar publicity campaign in Australia, V8s till 98. And I'm not sure, I might be able to find my letter somewhere that I wrote, and got a letter back from Chuck Chapman saying thank you. And as a result, Holden continued the V8, and that was very important because that really led to their later success as more of a performance-based company than Ford in many ways. So as I said earlier, the Holden V8 had 122 kilowatts, which is 164 horsepower. Torque was the main thing, 323 newton meters, which is 238 foot-pounds of torque. Still way away from, V8s of old, I guess, but that was as a result of the emission standards and the unleaded fuel. The model range consisted of the Commodore SL, the Commodore Executive, and the Bellina. There was also the luxury Calais model, and it was called Holden Calais, not Holden Commodore Calais. There was also a very small number of Calais station wagons made, 198, and these were offered from March 1988 through to the end of production in August 1988. and that was partially done to reduce stockpiles of wagon bodies. As I mentioned, there was a delay on the V8s due to unleaded fuel, and they were introduced in October 1986. In terms of special editions, there was a Commodore Vacationer available in the VL, which is a value pack aimed at the retail market. And then to commemorate the 1988 Australian Bicentennial, there was a Series 200 sedan, which was offered from March 1988. The Series 200 was issued with a two-tone champagne paintwork and featured, I would have thought cream and champagne, and featured air conditioning, power steering, electric windows, central locking, and it was based on the SL Commodore. And that was only available with the standard six-cylinder engine. It also had a little Australian flag on it too. In New Zealand, there were luxury models which included the GTS and the Royale, not with Royale with cheese though, just the Royale. There were a number of performance variants offered as well, and these included the Commodore SS Group A, which was a heavily modified vehicle designed to allow for certain modifications so the car could compete in the racing series as part of homologation. And that was based on the SS, so it was an SS Group A, and that was, as I said, designed for homologation for the Group A touring car racing. The regulations that were set down by FISA, which was the governing body, was that there had to be a minimum of 5,000 base model cars built and a further 500 Evolution Specials built to a certain specification before the car could compete. And the Group A regulations governed many touring car series from the 1980s and 90s, including Australia, New Zealand, Britain, Japan, Italy, Germany, and other European countries. And so this led to the creation of these Group A special editions. 500 of these VL Group A SSs were built. There were better aerodynamics in terms of spoilers and front air dams. More aggressive looking as well. There was an open bonnet scoop to help feed the carburetted V8 with a cold air intake at the base of the windscreen. The VL Commodore was also the last V8 powered Holden to feature a carburetor. The VL Group A SSs were built at Holden's Dandenong plant and then modified at HDT Special Vehicles, which was located in Port Melbourne. This was also the last Group A Commodore produced by HDT after there was a sensational split between Holden and Peter Brock. And there were a few reasons behind this. One of them was that he was fitting what was known as an energy polarizer. He had a bit of a guru that he was in touch with, a lot of natural healing and I guess crystals and things like that. And he was fitting these energy polarizers, which was designed to, create an environment for the perfect electronic sort of, wavelength or signals for the vehicle. General Motors engineers tested the polarizer and saw no benefit whatsoever. So it was seen as adding no value. But that wasn't really the main reason why there was a split between Holden and Brock. Even though that was questionable, speaking with Holden's engineering director, Tony Hyde, he said the main reason was when he released his Holden VL Director. And this was a very over-the-top car that Brock released, and he was refusing to let the Holden engineers test the vehicle. Normally, Holden engineering department would, test the VL Group A or any modifications that were done. It would go down to Lang Lang and undergo significant testing to ensure that, the vehicles had the reliability and the durability that was expected. The cars came with a full warranty, a Holden warranty. Anyway, Brock released this Director series, and he refused to hand it over for evaluation by Holden engineers. So Holden wrote to Brock and said that you must present that vehicle for evaluation and do not release that vehicle. Otherwise, the relationship between HDT, Brock and Holden would cease to exist. And I think Brock thought he was bigger than Holden, and it came to a head. Brock did the release of the vehicle. I've actually got a dealer ordering kit somewhere on that Director car. And he went ahead and did the launch, and it was very bitter between Holden and Brock. And so at the end of the day, Holden advised him that there was no longer a commercial relationship in place between Holden and Brock. So that car effectively killed the relationship and, what was a good income stream for Holden dealers or HDT dealers, but also Brock himself. After dumping HDT, Holden formed the Holden Motorsports Group in late February 87 and signed Roadways Racing Alan Grice and Perkins Engineering Larry Perkins as their factory-backed teams for the year, with both Grice and Perkins Commodores wearing Holden Motorsports logos. Though both Perkins and Grice claimed that the support was almost in name only and they received no financial assistance from Holden. Ironically, in late 1986, before the Holden HD split happened, there was already fraying relationships, as I mentioned earlier. Brock predicted that Holden had become wary of HDT's growing independence and wanted to start its own specialised operation. And that wasn't the reason at all. Ultimately, Holden did do that. There was the creation, along with Tom Walkinshaw, of Holden Special Vehicles. That did happen, but that was really, as a result of the fractured relationship between Brock and Holden. The SS Group A was twice the winner at the inaugural World Touring Car Championship in 1987. Alan Moffat and John Harvey drove their Rothman-sponsored VL Commodore to victory in the very first race of the championship at Monza in Italy. Pretty amazing, isn't it? Showcasing an Australian car in Italy and winning the race. Initially finishing 7th on the road, the pair were declared winners after the entire BMW Motorsport crew were found to be cheating with their BMW M3s that had finished 1 to 6. They were disqualified for running 80 kilograms underweight due to the use of non-homologated Kevlar and carbon fibre body panels. Moffat and Harvey would later go on to finish a brilliant 4th at the Spa 24 Hours in Belgium, before Moffat abandoned the Commodore and returned to rivals Ford for the first time since 1980, and their highly touted new challenger, the Ford Sierra turbocharged RS500. The HDT spec Commodore's second win in the 1987 World Touring Car Championship was at the 1987 James Hardie 1000 at Bathurst. Peter Brock and his HDT had a well-publicised split with Holden in early 87, which saw the factory stop all support for the race team. So running as a privateer at Bathurst for the first time since 1977, Brock finished 3rd on the road, driving with Peter McLeod and his regular HDT co-driver David Parsons in the team's second car, number 10, after his own car blew its engine on lap 34 with Parsons at the wheel. The two Eggenberger Motorsport Ford Sierra RS500s that finished 1st and 2nd were eventually disqualified in February 1988 for illegal bodywork, wheel arches that were too large. So Brock's HDT was declared the winners, giving the HDT spec VL Group A SS 2 wins from the 11-race World Touring Car Championship. With the demise of HDT and the arrival of the new venture, Holden Special Vehicles, there was the release of the SS Group A SV. And this was produced in 1988, and it was only available in one colour, which was Panorama Silver, named after the renowned Australian Mount Panorama circuit at Bathurst. It also was assembled at Dandenong plant and then modified at Clayton at HSV's facility. The car carried Holden badges because of Group A racing homologation regulations, which necessitated that at least 500 road-going versions were to be sold to the public. A series of 500 vehicles was commissioned by Holden, which rose to 750 to satisfy demand. That was a big mistake. All cars were finished in the Panorama Silver, as I mentioned. TWR, which was developed by Tom Walkinshaw, they developed the body kit, and that was stated to reduce drag by more than 25% over the previous Group A. Due to its high use of plastic in the body kit, the car was nicknamed the Plastic Pig and the Batmobile. There were other less derogatory nicknames And Walkinshaw is probably one of the most common ones, or Walkie, named after Tom Walkinshaw. The engine, although rated at 5 litres and 180 kilowatts or 241 horsepower, was specifically made to withstand racing conditions. The block was specially cast and the crankcase was fitted with 4-bolt main bearing caps. The heads were revised with high-flow intake ports and roller rockers. There were special connecting rods, crankshafts and pistons that were also fitted, as well as a custom exhaust. A key feature was also the use of the Walkinshaw twin throttle body inlet manifold, and that had been specifically developed for the Group A and featured sequential setup with a smaller and larger throttle body. And this was fitted with a restrictor plate on the larger secondary throttle body, which actually let less air through than the smaller throttle body. Some reports have indicated that as much as 50 to 60 horsepower could be gained from the removal of the restrictor plates. The Group A SV was made as a limited run of 500 from March to November 1988. But as I mentioned, HSV subsequently decided to make another 250 units to meet demand. Problem with that idea is, you really want in these limited run cars to ideally make one car too few than one car too many. Because that way the cars sell out, they become very desirable, they really go up in value, and they don't sit on dealers' floors. And what happened with these Walkinshaw cars, the initial batch sold very well, but a lot of these cars hung around for a long time, and I'm talking like well over 12 months. I remember when I joined Holden in 1989, I was looking at stock of some of my dealers. We'd review stock, anything that was over 90 days, and talk to the dealer about what are you doing to get rid of it. And inevitably, most of the heavy stock that dealers had, 200, 300 days old, were these VL Walkinshaw sitting on the floor, and they were very hard to shift when the VN Commodore had already been released, and you had an old generation, very expensive car. It's a little bit like what Plymouth went through with the Superbird and Dodge with the Daytona, I think. There's a lot of similarities there. The VL Group A SV should have really made its track debut early in 1988 in the Australian Touring Car Championship. However, due to the split between Holden and Peter Brock, the car was severely delayed in the change from HDT to HSV, and instead the car made its world racing debut on the 21st of August at Brands Hatch in the hands of Mike O'Brien, and it scored a 13th place in the 10th round of the 1988 British Touring Car Championship. Its Australian racing debut occurred on the 28th of August at Oran Park, driven by Gary Wilmington in the 1988 Pepsi 250, but Wilmington failed to finish. HSV owner Tom Walkinshaw and his longtime TWR driver Jeff Allen drove a TWR entered SV Group A in the 1988 RAC Tourist Trophy Series at Silverstone on the 4th of September, and they finished 15th. The car proved itself to be quick, but not up to speed of the Ford Sierras. Walkinshaw found that the Commodore's performance level was about the same as a factory-backed Nissan Skyline GTSR. TWR also raced the SV at the 1988 Tui's 1000 with the Perkins race team. That car expired after 137 laps, despite being in second place with an engine failure. And that was a rare thing for a Perkins-built engine. It's also the last time Tom Walkinshaw raced as the 1984 Touring Car Championship, and he retired from driving after the event. The best result for the new VL in its first year was when Perkins and HSV, Holden Special Vehicles teammate, Denny Holmes scored a 1-2 result in the Group A support race at the 1988 Australian Grand Prix. The pair had earlier finished at the 1988 NZ 500 in factory team's debut of the car. There's no doubt, though, with the Group A series that Holden did really struggle up against the Nissan GTR Skylines and also the Ford Sierra Turbos. But the fortunes for the car did turn around with a surprise win at the 1990 Tui's 1000 by Wyn Percy and Alan Grice, driving for the Holden Racing team. And that car was actually the same car that had failed under Tom Walkinshaw in the 1988 race. This was followed by a win in the 1990 Nissan Sydney 500 Eastern Creek by Perkins and Thomas Mazira in Perkins' privately entered car. A couple of other models that were produced by Holden Special Vehicles, HSV, in the VL series. Their first production car was an attempt at a luxury performance vehicle, a little bit similar to an HDT Director, and that was based on a 5-litre VL Calais with an upgraded power level, up 10 kilowatts or 13 horsepower to 136 kilowatts, which is 182 horsepower, and 355 newton meters or 262 foot-pounds of torque. The SV88, that's what it was known as, also featured minor body kits and VL Group A 16 by 7 inch wheels, and they were painted in the body colour, which was Dorwood blue. Options on the car at the time were a car phone, probably the size of a brick, and an in-car fax. Imagine how big that would be. There's no doubt that the VL Commodore was a huge improvement and much needed improvement over previous generations of Commodores. Albeit the cars were still saddled with a smaller packaging size compared to the Falcon, and also even the Mitsubishi Magna, as I mentioned earlier, which had been a very successful car, very popular car. I remember reading some interesting sales material of the Commodore versus the Magna, and I might have it somewhere, but they said something like it had a wedge-shaped design, and that reminded them of the P76, although they wouldn't want to wish the same fate on the Magna as the P76. And they also said that where Mitsubishi talked about having certain number of millimeters larger interior space, they said that's a lot of room if you're an ant. I just thought that was quite funny, the way they portrayed that in their internal sales staff literature. It wouldn't be until the release of the VN Commodore where Holden really started to compete with Falcon on a size basis, and then was a step up above the Mitsubishi Magna in terms of interior room. But that's for another episode. Total production of the Holden VL Commodore was 151,801 built. Well, hope you enjoyed that episode on the Holden VL Commodore. Please give the episode a thumbs up. It really does help the channel. Helps you get seen by more enthusiasts. Doesn't cost you a cent. And also, please make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes. If you haven't already, check out the other Commodore History Series episodes from VB, VC, VH, VK, and now obviously this VL series. Plus there'll be future episodes of other Commodore models coming up in the future. Also, if you like Falcons, you can click on the home page, look under playlists, and you can see the Falcon playlist for Falcon history. Every model from XK right through to FGX is there. And you can also hit on the same playlist summary for Valiant. Anyway, thanks very much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.